Hey there, folks. Zane from the Infinite Jukebox, aka the #1 Napalm Death fan, here with another quick album review. And today I wanted to talk about the new Justin Timberlake record, Everything I Thought It Was. The question of whether or not one could accurately deem Justin Timberlake as a washed up pop star is one that I don't think anybody really has a proper answer for, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, everyone has their thoughts, but on one hand, the guy's made some of the most definitive pop songs of the entire century so far. Tracks like Rock Your Body and Sexy Back have completely remolded popular music, specifically popular music made by male pop stars, and you know what, maybe that wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but it happened, so, can't really change that. In all seriousness, though, between his work with NSYNC that is now iconic, as well as his early solo work, which became extremely influential on plenty of mainstream music, there's really no denying that the man is technically one of the definitive pop stars of an era that has admittedly now come to pass, and then the last few years decided to not be so kind to him. 6 years ago, in 2018, Justin Timberlake put out the now infamous Man of the Woods, a record that I'm assuming was meant to be a sort of semi-vulnerable album from him, but is an album that I expect to show up on Train Records by Todd and the Shadows within the next 5 years, I'm not gonna lie. Look, it was a universally panned album, and it turned him from Justin Timberlake, the guy that makes hits, to Justin Timberlake, the guy that used to make a bunch of hits like a few years ago or something like that, when in reality, he was honestly still a pretty reliable hitmaker less than a decade ago. I mean, hell, Can't Stop the Feeling isn't even 10 years old. It feels like Everything I Thought It Was is JT's attempt to step back into the spotlight after years of being out of it for the most part, outside of some occasionally negative press, but that's neither here nor there. And as a whole, it kind of feels like a culmination of the various different sounds and influences that he's drawn from over the course of his career: pop music, dance music, R&B, and some other various forms of funk depending on the record. And while that doesn't necessarily sound like a bad idea, being the kind of record that's sort of a reflection of his career up to this point, the way it turns out is nothing more than a ginormous bloated mess that's nearly as much of a disaster as his last disaster. Look, from the perspective of vocal work alone, he sounds fine here for the most part, fine enough at the very least. In fact, there are even a couple tracks that I would say as being, from a technical vocal standpoint, decent. Some of the ballads here, like Love and War, he sings them well enough. I mean, I'm not a vocal coach, I can't tell him how to sing, but if you're looking at things from a purely technical standpoint, I think that he does well enough on most of the tracks here, but that's about the highest compliment I'm willing to give this record. However, that is talking just from a technical standpoint, because I think his reliance on charismatic production on some of his better works really does shine through on this record, which doesn't have any particularly notable production of any kind, because with no real flavor backing him up, all you're left with is him, Justin Timberlake himself. And try as he might to be the modern century Michael Jackson, the guy has as much personality as a pair of khakis. There are tracks on here where he's trying to be intimate and intense, like Fucking Up the Disco, which occurs sadly very quickly on this record, is just downright laughable, and it feels so baffling how lacking in confidence he feels on this record, despite being someone who's been active in the music industry for decades now. It almost feels like he doesn't want to be too emotional, because that might be a little too much for this record, almost like him trying to do anything remotely different on Man of the Woods was just too experimental, and that's why people didn't like it. When in reality, people didn't like Man of the Woods because it's bad. Kind of like how I don't like this album because it's bad. My point is, he takes no risks, and it sounds like he's very nervous to even be there in the first place, and it's almost kind of comical at times. I think a highlight of misguided performance work on this record is the sort of call and response section of the track My Favorite Drug, which kind of feels like the whole what's cooler than being cool, ice cold part of Hey Ya by Outkast, but like if Andre 3000 thought that mayo was too spicy. And because of some really weak production, none of the instrumentals have any specific vibe to them. They just are. I can't really explain them in any other way other than they lack anything of notability other than the fact that they are sounds and that they are technically music, and that especially affects some of the would-be funky cuts like Play and Infinity Sex, because I don't know if you're aware, but funk kind of needs, funk. The sort of trap pop rock fusion going on the track Sanctified is especially kind of annoying in all honesty, just because of the fact that it feels like it's trying to convince you that it's experimental by his standards, when in reality it just feels like a cookie cutter Justin Timberlake track with a preset guitar added in during the chorus, and it is nowhere near as exciting or grand as I think it's trying to come off as. Everything I thought it was is also extremely bloated, with a runtime of nearly 80 minutes, making this a pretty excruciating listen for anybody who wants to listen to this multiple times to form a full opinion. I mean, someone who would do that would be an absolute moron to listen to a nearly 80-minute long Justin Timberlake album from 2024 multiple times, but, if there were someone dumb enough to do that, then, they would probably not enjoy it. And the frustrating part is there is surprisingly a couple of decent tracks throughout the record. I think Flame is fairly well made. I mean, it's not amazing, but you have these subtle strings and guitars throughout some portions of the song that I think give it its own unique personality in the context of the record. You also have the track Paradise, which is a collaboration with his old band NSYNC, and while it's not amazing, I think it's kind of cute, kind of sweet to see them back together, and even though it's not about them or anything like that, I think it's kind of a beautiful thing to see the boys, see the boys, it's gonna be me boys back together, okay? It's nice to see. This is like a really nice Justin Timberlake times the other members of NSYNC fanfic moment, alright? However, let me remind you, this album's nearly 80 minutes long. That's 2 songs that I liked out of an 80-minute long record, roughly. And in the context of an album that's nearly the length of the average feature-length film that you would see at a theater, just about a dozen minutes short, I think, they don't have that much impact, to the surprise of no one. Everything I thought it was is doing its absolute best to combine all of the dance, funk, pop, R&B influences that Timberlake has collected throughout the course of his fairly beloved career, and I think that's somewhat admirable. There are plenty of late stage career albums made by artists that are primarily based around collecting all of the different sounds that they've utilized over the course of various albums, and making something that feels final for them, even if it's not the final record, a sort of magnum opus, if you will. The issue is that this album's terrible at doing that. There was legitimate potential here, but the result of Timberlake and company's creative direction, or seemingly lack thereof, is that it generally fails in doing anything at all. There's no direction on this album, it's filled with bloat, there's 2 good tracks in the context of a nearly 80-minute record. This album seemingly serves no purpose, and while you could argue that it's not as outright bad or offensively infuriating as Man of the Woods, this record is arguably significantly more tedious, if not just for the fact that I feel this album could have been at least half decent. I'm going to give this record 1.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this quick album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.